Hello and welcome to my first video for TCGplayer.com. My name is Steve Rubin and I'm going to go ahead and be in a modern event today. I'm going to be playing with the Bant Eldrazi deck that has been seeing some play ever since Pascal Maynard top-aided, I believe, Grand Prix LA with it. Essentially, you know, it's not as powerful as the old Eldrazi decks, but you still have some really strong early Thought-Knot-Seers and Reality Smashers, and just the gist of the deck is that it is a deck that is really good at preying upon other fair decks. You know, you have Cavern of Souls, which essentially makes all your Eldrazi uncounterable. You have these threats that are very hard to deal with just lightning bolts and stuff like that. So let's just go ahead and go by this. Starting with the mana base. So the mana base is pretty heavy on these lands. You need a lot of colorless sources in this deck because Thought-Knot, Reality Smasher, and Matter Shaper. It's kind of weird because you would figure, well, like maybe Temple and Cavern and some Pain lands is enough, but you actually have games where you don't have colorless sources. So I think it's important to have the full. We have 6 Pain lands, 4 Cavern of Souls, and 4 Eldrazi Temple. The rest of the mana base is just shock fetch. We have, 4 Windswept Heaths with the assorted Bant shock lands, and then a few basics. No basic island. There actually isn't any blue. I mean, obviously, Drowner of Hope is devoid, but Drowner of Hope is the only blue card in the main deck, and you can cast it off Cavern of Souls and Noble Hierarch. So generally speaking, you don't really need the basic island. That's not that big of a deal. If anything, it would hurt your draws more often than it would help you. So we go in and we do have 5 mana guides. It's kind of a weird number. You know, you see some Naya Coco decks playing with the 5 mana dork split just to make sure you have that 1-drop a little bit more often. You know, you want it on turn 1, but you don't want to draw too many during the course of the game. So I think 5 is a sweet spot here, as we do have these Ancient Stirrings, which kind of holds the deck together. Ancient Stirrings helps find threats, and it also helps you find, importantly, Eldrazi Temple and Sideboard cards, which we will get to in a bit. Essentially just makes the deck more consistent. It's like a Ponder, Preordain, Oath of Nissa kind of card. And now any white deck is going to be playing 4 Path to Exile. There's a lot of creature combo decks in Modern, decks that are trying to play Primeval Titan, decks that are trying to kill you with Inkmoth Nexus, stuff like that. Weird inclusion in this deck is 2 Spellskite. I think some of the originalists didn't have any Spellskites, but Spellskite is kind of a necessary evil because a lot of the decks that you're bad against, like Affinity and Poison, and sometimes to a lesser extent maybe Burn, but more than Burn is like Suicide Zoo, the decks that are using tons of pump spells and very little removal spells in their deck. Spellskite is just something we can find to interact in Game 1, and can be game-ending in Game 1 against a Poison deck or a Death Shadow Zoo deck. So having 2 is nice. I mean, it's kind of a weird card because it doesn't really... We're kind of a beatdown strategy and doesn't really do that, but it does provide a nice little blanket where if we're curving out into Matter Shapers, Thought-Knot-Seers, and Reality Smashers, like, it is nice to just be able to go ahead, play a Spellskite on turn 2 or 3 before we play our threat. That way, if they have a Path or a Bolt, essentially we upgrade our Spellskite into a better card. So Spellskite's not insane or anything, but it's just kind of a role player. And here we also have the 8 3-drops, 4 Matter Shapers, 4 Displacers. Matter Shaper are not that great in a lot of matchups, but it just helps you hit your land drops. It helps you really win in any sort of fair matchup. Like, it's very hard for a deck to, like Jund or Blue-White-Red or Zoo to kind of effectively deal with the Matter Shaper, which is why he's here. We have 1 Dismember, which I'm trying out. At the WMCQ, last time I played this deck, I had the Dismember in the sideboard, but right now I think there are a lot of Zoo decks, there are a lot of Affinity decks, and actually a lot of Merfolk decks that I've seen. Not to mention also actually kind of a new... There's more Jund than usual, so just having that 5th removal spell is nice. Displacer, obviously great, lets us win late games with Drowner of Hope, lets us, deal with annoying permanents like... caught me off guard here, but annoying permanent. More that it can help us deal with cards like Become Immense, help us deal with cards like Ravager. It's just a card that it's really good against pretty much all of the creature decks. Obviously not so good against other control decks, but it does have like Hidden Mode, Blinking Thought-Knot-Seer, or Drowner, which is fine. Thought-Knot-Seer, obviously the bread and butter of the deck. We can cast it as early on turn 2, but we're trying to get this on turn 3 so we can beat down and disrupt our opponent. And then the finishers, Reality Smasher and Drowner of Hope. I think that Smasher is is pretty good. Often you side it out because there's a lot of matchups where it's just not that impressive. You know, you don't have Ivugan anymore. It's often costing you 4 mana. But the card that has impressed me a lot, and I see some people cutting down to 2, down to 3 as Drowner of Hope. I'm playing the full 4. It just makes you win the fair decks, but it's weird. You would figure that this card would be bad against a deck like Affinity or Zoo, Suicide Zoo, you know. But it actually is like once you resolve it against some of these creature matchups, it's actually, you know, obviously insane. I mean, 6 mana is a lot for Modern. Hopefully you're only paying 4 or 5 mana for it, but ideally, you know, it just lets you turn the corner. It gives you a payoff for having these Eldrazi lands in your deck, so I really like playing 4 Drowner. But that's the main deck. Pretty straightforward. You know, you're just trying to play creatures every turn, stay ahead, you know, hopefully put your opponent in a tough spot where they can either, like, try to kill your guy or deploy threats, and, you know, like, you can really snowball a lead with this deck, you know, especially with all the undercosted Eldrazi. So let's go ahead and minimize this a little bit. Look at the sideboard that we're working with. Sideboard's a work in progress. I've been working on this sideboard for a while, but it kind of fluctuates with the new metagame. Right now we have, I'm not sure about this split, and this might be a bit intense, but I have 2 Cage and 3 Rest in Peace. I think that the new rising popularity of the dredge decks means that you want a lot of graveyard hate in your sideboard, especially in a deck like this, because you pretty much, I'm not a combo deck. I'm trying to play a fair game with creatures. I pretty much cannot beat a dredge deck. I cannot beat, you know, armies of 2/2s, you know, recurring prize amalgams. It's just going to be too much for me to deal with. So we have the full 5 spells. It's kind of weird. It's possible that you want 3 Cage and 2 Rest in Peace. Cage is nice because you can find it off Stirrings, but it's much easier for the Dredge deck to deal with Cage because, you know, they have Ancient Grudge. They do have Nature's Claim, but, you know, Rest in Peace, it is nice to actually get rid of those graveyards, you know, set them back a little bit. And Rest in Peace has... Grafdigger's Cage does have... They both have applications in different matchups, right? Like, Cage, you know, strong against Coco decks, and potentially strong against some gift Snapcaster Mage decks. It sounds weird, but I did have one match at the WMCQ where I played against a Lingering Soul Snapcaster control deck, and I caged him, and it won me a game I could never win, so that's nice. But Rest in Peace can be really good against Living End, really good against Grixis, so they both have, you know, their ups and downs. But right now I'm going to try 3 Rest in Peace, 2 Cage, 2 Malira. Really weird because, you know, it's kind of hard to justify having such a narrow card in such a wide format like Standard, but I think Infect was one of my losses at the WMCQ, and it's a really bad matchup. And you do have Spell Skites, but the problem is they end up boarding in Twisted Images, so you can't really rely on your Spell Skites. You'd much rather go with something that they need to dismember, which they usually only have 1, maybe 2. So that's why I like Malira, and it's a threat that just beats down. It's reasonable. I'm going to try it out. It might be too narrow to play, but I think it's one of your worst matchups. So, like, this deck is pretty tight and is pretty good against fair decks. So you have the luxury of just overloading your sideboard against the combo decks. Because, like I said before, we're really not great against fast combo, but we're good against pretty much everything else. Anything trying to play fair. 1 negate. Usually people play Stubborn Denial, but I actually have had some issues with Stubborn Denial. It's pretty hard to get it online, and a lot of the times you get in a situation where once the Stubborn Denial is online, like, you have enough mana for negate anyway. So I could see Stubborn Denial being better, but we're going to go with 3 negates. 3 Stony Silences just for Tron and Affinity, obviously. 1 Worship, just a nice 1-of against Burn and Zoo. Worldbreaker is like the one kind of fair deck card I have in my sideboard, because especially in matchups where I need to board out the Path of Exiles, like, you need something to bring in, and Worldbreaker is that something. You can find it off Ancient Stirrings, and is my card that I need against Tron. You know, it is nice to have Tron hate. Blowing up lands is nice. Exiling Wormcoils is nice. And then 2 Engineer Explosives, pretty standard. You see it in these decks. Since you have Ancient Stirrings and not that many 1 or 2 drops, you can get a ton of blowouts with Engineer Explosives, so that's pretty much an auto-include in every Bant Eldrazi deck. So there's the deck. Let's go ahead and hop into round 1 here. I'll see you guys in a moment.